Good morning. I'm Amy Clark with Hilton Worldwide Sales and a longtime member of GSAE. Really happy to be talking with you today. Lori Spear and I co-chair the Pajama Brigade. For those of us who typically work in a remote environment. However, this year, we've had new challenges and opportunities with our committee. So this has been an exciting development for the Pajama Brigade this year. Because we're a relatively small group today, one thing that I would love is, first of all, to hear from you with any questions while I'm speaking. I'm just going to talk a little bit about coaching and managing individuals or teams in the remote environment. But I'd love to know, at least from a show of hands, because I can see most of you, how many of you manage individuals or coach teams? Just raise your hand. Yeah, good. Okay, thank you. So 2 points for this morning for us to consider. First of all, increasing flexibility, and in this environment, decreasing expectations. That may seem like an odd thing to say in a coaching environment, but we are living a reality that is unknown. We can all agree on that, never seen before in our lifetimes. And for those of you who were on the call last week, which might seem like a year ago, for those of you who were on the call last week, we started sort of level setting by saying, you know, we need to lead with empathy and lead with emotional intelligence. And so in the coaching environment, when working with individuals, coaching your teams, working remote naturally holds the need for increased flexibility. Even in the normal day-to-day life that we knew a month ago, flexibility in the work environment, in the remote work environment, is a given. And more often than not, it also can lead to increased productivity in many cases. Now, that's not necessarily the environment that we're in right now. So when you come into a work environment, one of the things that you have the opportunity to do with your direct reports is ask them as individuals to examine their own productivity. Meaning, I think one of the great things about the remote work environment is that it is a wonderful exercise in self-awareness. You come to know, when are you most productive? What sort of time blocks can you work in? And how do you want to structure your day? So invite your teams to do that as well. They will start to learn their own rhythm in this work environment. And getting to know each other's rhythm in a remote work environment is an important exercise as well. So one of the things that, while we're allowing increased flexibility in the remote work environment, one of the things that is not flexible, and especially not now, is the need for communication. It probably, especially right now, we're not in danger of over communicating right now. We need and want to be over communicating. Now, for your work environment, decide what that means. Is it Slack? Is it Microsoft Teams? Is it you're texting each other? Is it you're on the phone more than you normally would be? Whatever works for your work environment, develop a system and develop a cadence for communication. We'll move to expectations in just a moment, but in the remote work environment, whether it's today's strange reality or the normal reality that we'll be back to at some point in time, establish that cadence of communications and keep it, stick to it. You as a leader need to stick to it so that your teams will come to expect it. And when communicating, when it's high stakes, make that with video. Make that an expectation. It might be high stakes because it's an important topic, or it might be high stakes because it's a coaching opportunity where you need to be communicating about with feedback and constructive criticism and providing direction. So moving to expectations, there's been a lot online right now about lowering expectations. Your kids are not going to learn what they would learn if they were sitting at school right now, but they probably will learn a lot of other things through this experience. That is one of the things that we can take from this experience, the opportunity for some real life learning, which all of us can do right now. But when it comes to decreasing expectations with your teams, that's really about empathy and emotional intelligence, and understanding that your teams will probably be dealing with some distractions and some worries and some requirements that are not normal in day-to-day life in the work environment. So just know that and be as empathetic as you can. However, always in the work environment, we need to set expectations. I was reminded recently of a phrase for coaching that I find very valuable, which is, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. So we as leaders of individuals and teams, when we have to provide direction, when we have to provide coaching or feedback, we are doing a disservice to our teams if we are beating around the bush, if we're not being direct about what expectations are. This is a perfect time in our world, regardless of what sector you work in, to provide clear focus to your teams. And it's just about keeping the main thing the main thing. For you, that may be your members, your particular stakeholders, whatever that means. If you're in a service environment, it's your customers, whoever that stakeholder is for you. This is a great time for sort of side projects. We got a good excuse to push those to the side, way to the side, and keep the main thing, and provide that focus for your teams. And lastly, the one thing that doesn't go away in the work environment, remote work environment, is define deliverables and timetables. Timelines, I should say. Define deliverables and timelines. Those things don't change. And so if we can just speak frankly for a moment about, the fear that exists around working remote, decreased productivity, people kind of doing what they want to all day, every day, if deliverables are not met, if timelines are not respected, you will come to know that. Whether you're sitting in an office together or not sitting in an office together, you will come to know that, and then you will take the steps necessary to address it. But the fact is that the remote work environment can be highly productive for many people. Again, outside of what's happening today, for many people, it can be a wonderful way to really have a new lease on life and introduce some life hacks that will take you into a really wonderfully balanced environment with your work and your family, your professional and your personal life. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Can I hire you as a keynote speaker?
Right on. Oh, I'm not that much of an expert, just learning from experience.
So, Amy, I know we have a mix of supervisors of teams, as well as folks that are CEOs today. Can you outline some of your tips for having a difficult conversation if it becomes, I know you mentioned having it on video and not making it a phone call if at all possible, but could you do you outline what you want to say before the phone call or the video happens? Or can you give us a little bit of your process for because that is the elephant in the room, I think, right now for so many of our folks.
Yeah. Well, it starts from the beginning by setting expectations. And so we as leaders have to check ourselves first, and ask ourselves, did I clearly define what was expected? And then if you move past that question and you feel that you need to take a coaching opportunity, have a conversation that is centered on constructive feedback, the most important thing that we do as leaders is we must prepare for those conversations. It's hard to take your preconceived notions and whatever internal biases you may have out of that conversation, because, you know, when you work with a team member for a while, you feel like you know what they're going to say, you might know how they're going to react, and it's important to know what they might say and how they might react, but you have to be as dispassionate as you can in a conversation like that, and take as much emotion out of it as you can. It's a very important exercise, again, in self-awareness, but it's about preparing. So you need to know, you know, here are the 2 or 3 points that I want to communicate, and you need to, if it's helpful for you to actually write what you're going to say, then practice that, because the most important thing that you can do in a coaching conversation is not be the one talking all the time. So you need to present here's what was expected, here's what was delivered, how do you respond to that?
I have a question for you, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about defining deliverables and timelines, and I think that's absolutely fabulous, especially in this remote world. Are you defining the deliverable and then setting the timeline and then letting staff run with it? Or is there any sort of tracking that you're using? Because sometimes when I release a project, I can't get it out of my head until I can
right.
see that it was kind of checked
Mm-hmm.
off. What
Mm-hmm.
advice do you have for that one?
Well, you know, I work and have worked for many years in a sales environment, so that we have a lot of tracking mechanisms.
Okay.
However, I also adore project work. So I think the best thing is something like project work, which I infer is maybe what you're referring to.
Yes.
Is you have milestones, you know, so a project is probably going to have, you know, 10 or 20 steps to it. So you want to probably break down the checkpoints, you know, where do we need to check in? What do you, Angela, consider important milestones in the project work?
That's excellent. And I know some people are using the tool Asana for project management work. Is there any other tools that you guys recommend to kind of enter the project and maybe highlight some of those key milestones?
Put that out to the field.
I think there are plenty of people who could answer that, who tested them. Michelle in Mizboat had to test drive a whole bunch of them before we landed on the one that we chose, which is Asana. So Michelle, if you want to start, and then I think others have practiced with other ones, including Basecamp, Asana, Todoist. I mean, the list actually does go on and on. Michelle.
Yeah, Mizbo uses Asana, but in looking at it, as Damien said, we tried others. Personally, I've looked at Wunderlist, I have looked at Todoist, I've looked at those. But as we started building out Asana, there is one that I started seeing everywhere I looked, that it was all about project management software. And I think Lori might be able to jump in here, which is Monday.com. So I have not tried it, but I think Lori can probably give some feedback on that.
I am not a big fan of Monday.com yet. I think it is, I think it is a very sophisticated platform that has a lot of bells and whistles that we have not started using yet. I don't find the user interface to be very user friendly. And therefore I don't like to use it. So we're still working on that, and I will report back as we continue. That said, it is a great place to share things, and I can share a screen later if you want me to, because everyone can access it and get notified when there are changes, and you can view things different ways, and it does a lot. I just don't know that much about it yet.
And the only other one I'll throw out there is we have not used it internally at MISBO, but I have used Basecamp for project management with outside contractors. That also works well.
And apparently the new version of Basecamp is far superior to the old one. So when we were looking at it and had to adopt one, it wasn't up to snuff. But I think now it might be. But I mean, at this point, if we were to make a change in MISBO and change that platform at the moment, we would be lynched. So we're trying very hard not to make many changes.
And also Pete Zimick, who's Novi AMS, his company is all Asana all the time. For those of you that were on last week, Mike Pennington got a lot of experience with Slack through when he was employed with Novi AMS. And so I'll reach out to Pete and see if on a follow-up call he could kind of talk us through for anybody that's interested in diving into Asana more deeply as well. Amy, thank you. Any words of wisdom? I can tell you, I personally wrote down clear is kind and unclear is unkind. We're all trying to be empathetic to folks and trying to be graceful and patient with the circumstances that are so unusual and so unprecedented that I think that still falling back on the deliverables that we need to be pushing forward for our members and our communities it is a good point. But do you have any closing advice? Because I know you've got to run very shortly.
My only closing comment is allow your teams to do their best work. Meaning, over time, I think that if you stay in a work environment, you come to know the cadence of your team, you come to know everyone's habits, and so then you just need to observe when those change. Because I think that you can still feel what's happening with your team, your group, your organization, even if you're not in the physical building together. You do develop a way of having instincts in the remote environment, and that comes over time. I really am happy to have had the chance to talk with you all today. Tiff, I want you to know that we are transitioning to Microsoft Teams right now, and I won't be able to hear everything that you have to say today, and I'm going to miss out on that. But I know we're recording, so that's good. So once I disappear, please don't think that I am leaving you because I want to. I'm leaving you because I have to.
Thank you so much, Amy. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it. And we certainly are all aware of where our hotel partners are right now. And so thanks. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next week.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So everybody, I'm going to have Tip unmute herself. Dun, 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 dun. And give a brief introduction. She is my epitome of there's an association for everything. Yeah, and so Tip, take it away, and I'm going to mute myself because I think the neighborhood children are taking their playtime right now.
Well, I apologize ahead of time if my 8-year-old comes over and needs help with 3-digit multiplication or ancient Mesopotamia. Any of that is possible. So, but yeah, I mentioned we, as an association, I work for the International Society of Arboriculture. In late 2018, the association decided that it was going to move from Champaign, Illinois to Atlanta. So I was part of I was the second hire as we made that transition. We have transitioned now 30-some staff and hired them all almost completely here in Atlanta, came into a new office building in downtown Atlanta. So that was a lot of transition. And we knew that one of the keys to that, knowing that we would have staff in Champaign and staff in Atlanta for a while, and then moving to an environment where we had 2 actual remote staff, but just generally, it's been wonderful that we were already set up so well to make the transition, even though we are an in-office staff, generally day to day. And one way we do that is Teams. So I'm going to share screen, if at all possible, and show you a little bit about how we use it. I use it probably more than anyone because I manage 7 committees and I manage 64 components all over the world. So this really has been the tool I've used to make sure I can stay abreast and keep everyone aware of what's going on. And it's been particularly useful here in the last few weeks. Can everyone see my screen? Awesome. So we have obviously different teams, different channels for each item. And within that set group, so for instance, this is just our directors and our leadership team. We have different projects that maybe we'll have, or different reasons for needing separate channels for things. This is my staff. This is our whole staff. And then I have all these wonderful committees that I work with as well. So I'm able to keep them separate. I'm also able, which is very cool, to create private channels. So for example, when I have, one of the things we're doing is I'm working on a translation team. So we're going to be sending back lots of different files that no one else should have access to except their core group of volunteers. And so we're able to lock down those files, and only they can see them and only they can communicate about them. So I love that feature. But generally we use it for everything. So you might see here on my screen, we had someone who had a birthday. So this is our way to being able to share what's going on in our lives and stay connected, especially right now, but on a day-to-day basis, what kind of announcements, who's brought cookies into the kitchen and whatnot. But also we use it, and let me walk through. If you'll see, it does all sync with your Outlook, so all your other Microsoft products. So my calendar is all synced together. To me, one of the best features, however, is really the call feature. I'm able to call anybody directly from this, and I'm able to call, I love being able to call any of my component executives in Singapore or wherever. We don't have to have a separate setup for that. We can call directly from this. We can do large team calls all at the same time. It's super easy and friendly. One of the best features of Teams, for sure. And Teams is actually just a front for SharePoint. So it is a file sharing and collaborative system. So when we create a team, and I will use, let me see, one of mine, I'm trying to think who I have lots of files for. So for instance, these are my component leaders. We have folders. These are all backed up to SharePoint. So I can go into the SharePoint site itself and I can do searches here. I can edit from here if this is where I'm more comfortable, but all of these have different SharePoint sites. That's one reason that we can keep that privacy locked down in specific ways. So if you're familiar at all with SharePoint, that makes it super easy. Let me see.
Hey, Tiff.
Yeah.
Question, because I'm not familiar with SharePoint. Is that
Okay.
the equivalent of Dropbox?
It essentially is. I mean, I think it's and Damien, I know you're a Dropbox kind of fan, but SharePoint was really Microsoft's first product of large file holding and sharing, storage and sharing. And so for years, we have been working on a really outdated SharePoint site that required IT assistance to really do anything or skin it in a way that was at all user-friendly. So this allows it, really the interface to be super, super friendly, but the wonderful storage capacity is still there for SharePoint, and it's all still being managed by Microsoft in their SharePoint system.
Tip, as a follow-up to that, because this is, I'm so impressed so far. How did, when you, all this setup, so I see that your name, for example, is modified by Tip Tucker. Did you set up all these folders as part of your workflow, or with SharePoint or with Teams, is it,
Yes.
does it also integrate with something like a OneDrive?
Yes, you can integrate, yes, you can. Let me show you.
Okay.
So down here on the left corner.
Oh, wow. Wait. Tip, you muted yourself.
It
Hold
just
on.
keeps going.
There you
now.
go.
Okay, you can hear me now?
I was trying
okay.
to unmute you.
Okay.
Let's try again.
I don't think I did, but it did. Okay, so yes, it has a whole a menu of apps that you can integrate, and so you see Asana is actually on there. But yes, and it's growing. When I first started a year and a half ago on this, there were maybe 20, and it just seems like every time I look on there, there's more and more that you can integrate. But Teams comes with a variety, a small number of pretty useful ones. So we were talking about planners a minute ago. I don't use it as much as I should. I set it up and then I've just chosen not to use it. So here's where you can literally just add the tab up here. Where's my, oh, here it is. So each of my staff have a planner, and this is what that planner looks like. This is really just a task list. You can create schedules for them. So you can do some planning in here, although I don't like it nearly as much as I've liked some of the other apps that I've used. So I would be interested to try to use Asana or one of those other items. But one other way, dog. One other way that we've used this, one second, let me see if I can. Dog. Of course, he's gonna bark now. One of the other items that I really have grown to love is they all come also with a wiki. So that is a place that I've used for my components, a place where we can post, because one thing we lost was a home page in SharePoint. So this is the place where I put all of our upcoming information, call information, closures, anything that is just information that they need to be able to access. And we've also done one for, say, different procedures that they may need to tackle. So if my staff needs important information about how to do something, or my component needs to know how to order something, we can put those instructions on there for them to search and access at any time, which is awesome.
And Tip, I have a follow-up question on this. This piece of it, this wiki, is just for your staff members, correct?
Well, this is for my committee members, actually.
Okay.
This is for my components.
Perfect.
But we have them for...
Yes.
Yep.
That was the next question, because Valerie Smith was wondering, if you have someone who isn't a part of your association staff, to be part of the team, do they need to have a Microsoft account in order to access the things you've set up?
They set up a Teams account. And so I have, for example, my Hispanic committee is all over Latin America, and none of them had been working on Teams. And so you'll actually see where we've added a guest here. So they are logged as a guest with just their email. They will have to go in and accept the invitation, create their account, and they can access it either from the desktop, or they can download, which I'd encourage everyone to do, the phone app, because it is very, very user-friendly. And I would say there was one more thing I was going to show. And what was that? These were all the big things, I know. I think more than anything, and this was brought up on the last call, was really, it is a collaborative, it is, to me, very similar to Slack. It is about collaboration, and it's about file sharing. So those are the things it does extremely well. Other things it doesn't do extremely well. But I think it's really about finding what you're trying to get out of it. But I think for us, in the moment that we're in right now, needing to be able to feel more connected, needing to be able to share files, that's important. I remember what it was. So we were spending a lot of money on a policy tracking software. I don't know if y'all still are doing that, but we had every policy from the last 20 years sitting in this very expensive policy software. And what we found out is that Teams can actually do that because it is a SharePoint site. So we're able to go in and have all of our procedures, policies and procedures for every job. Oops, and I keep hitting the wrong thing. For all of our policies and procedures, open them in SharePoint. I can search them. I can see the history of those documents so that we know what committee policy got changed or what board policy got changed, changes to the bylaws. And so all of that's available. So we have been able to get rid of several of those softwares where we used to have an independent chat software. We have independent policy management software, a different file sharing software. We're able now to do that in one central place. So yeah, I have to say in the beginning, I wasn't totally sure I was going to like it, but it has been very user-friendly. And with the exception of a handful of my committee members who are still trying to get on the ball, which is always hard to get them to accept a new software. Most people have been like, wow, this has been really user-friendly and catch on really quickly.
Tip, do people outside, like, do they have to set up a Microsoft account if they don't already have one?
They have to set up a Teams account.
They have to set up a Teams.
Yeah. So, and it's all Microsoft, but they don't have to have a Microsoft account. They just have to have a Teams account.
Okay.
I have a question. This is Amber Leland from CRC. I'm new today to this group, sitting in for Chris Tennant, who you guys may be more familiar with. He's tied up in a 50-person WebEx meeting right now, but thanks for letting us sit in. This has been, I think, really useful. We've been using Teams just within our own office, and so I really like, how you shared that we can maybe add people from outside our network. But I am curious, on your file sharing, are you maintaining just your SharePoint as that's your exclusive file sharing, and you're not, or do you have stuff that you're constantly moving back and forth from within your own network to the SharePoint site? And especially on the policy documents, is that just like your primary location that you're keeping this information, or how are you handling that?
Let me speak first to the policy and procedure documentation. That is our warehouse, and that's where the most current editions of all of those documents must be, and that's policy within the organization. So when we make a slight change, for example, we just made a change to where a spreadsheet lived the other day. I was like, we got to go back and make the policy document change. So they have to be updated, and that is the resource we all go to. For everything else, we're a little bit in that limbo place right now. So for my committees, I am very much using this as their primary place for documents. For general staff, we have mostly been using it as a collaborative zone. So if we have something that we all need to be able to access, touch, collaborate on, instead of putting it on the server, we're trying to put it on Teams. I think the end goal is for us to move all documents over to Teams eventually. So, thank you. And so that is, I think that will happen, but it just hasn't been high priority yet to make that full transition. We do still have an internal server that the bulk of our files live on.
How does editing that and kind of, I mean, it looks like you have hundreds of people on your teams. Is there, is there a risk of people editing something that you didn't want edited in that way, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, no, there absolutely is. The good news though is I can actually go in and see when and who edited the last item. So there's a really good example. We just had a leadership meeting and we had an agenda set, and so it's one of those quirky things. I pulled it up and I took off everyone else's bits but mine, and when I closed the document, it saved it. And I lost all of their work and I panicked. So I was like, oh, how do I get this back? So I had to go back into SharePoint and pull up the last version and re-up it. And so I was like, thank goodness. But yeah, that's one of the good things and the bad things is that it's a live collaborative space. So there is the potential to go in and make edits and then go, oh my gosh, yeah, I should have made that edit. And it saved it. But I can always go back and see the history, which is kind of the bonus, and restore it.
So Tip, I have two questions. Angela had asked on chat, does it notify you when changes are made if those are kind of your team documents? Does it send out something and say, you know?
Yes, and I will say that's been one of our learning curves, is that people didn't realize that they needed to go and set up their independent notifications. So they're like, well, I'm not getting any notifications of things. And you're like, well, have you gone into your settings? Because you can set it up individually however you like it. And so there are a few workarounds to it, but you can go in and kind of edit how you want, say, team notifications to be set up. But then in your independent area, which I would have to go back and find, you can, oh, it's down. Where is it? It's usually like a little wheel, and I don't even know where it is. That's how little once I set it up, I'll never use it again.
But that's really
it may be
helpful.
just my screen. Oh yeah. So yeah, you can go in and just kind of create your notification. So some things I want to be notified of, some things I don't. So.
And my second thing, I have three questions right in a row.
Okay.
For example, in Dropbox, I can lock something. If I open something that Jenny and I share in our kind of shared server, I can lock it for editing while I'm working on it.
Yep.
Is there a feature like that in Teams or within SharePoint that y'all are utilizing?
You know, I have not done that file by file. That is a good question.
I mean, and I guess for us to be specific, when I've opened a document and I don't want, I'm editing it and I want to then save it back to our Dropbox folders. I don't want Jenny to open it while I'm working on it and make changes that clash.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
So if you see, there's actually a checkout feature, and that basically stalls anybody else from accessing that document periodically. So I don't use it a lot, but that's a really good point. That that's something we could use more of. But you know, sometimes they have so many features, you're like, oh man, I haven't thought about that. But yes, there is a checkout feature for that.
And then my third one, when y'all launched within the company and launched both the SharePoint and using Teams, what kind of training were y'all doing? Were you going online? And I ask because we actually had a member ask us about Microsoft Excel training about 2 months ago, and Jenny and I both looked at each other and said, I have no idea who does this locally. And at that point, of course, we were all very free to move around, and they were looking for me to come in and do training in person for their staff. And so can you walk us through just a little bit of how y'all did the prep work, and recognizing that these are weird times and none of us may be able to do this right now, but.
Yeah, no, I would say we didn't do a lot of training. I think we did one very basic training at the very beginning with staff, and we probably do a quick 20-minute overview when staff come in. But generally, because most folks on staff are not using the bulk of, they're using it to share files and they're using it to share information on the message boards, they probably don't need that much of too much of a download on items. I have had to learn a little bit more as I've gone along about managing my team on here and about creating my committee folders and kind of what works and what doesn't work. And it has been a bit of a learning process, but there hasn't been too much that Teams hasn't been able to do that I've wanted it to do. The only thing that we've encountered is because the way SharePoint is set up, if you make items private, you can't just with an easy wave of the wand move it into a public zone. It locks it down into a separate SharePoint private area. So I, for example, had a component who wanted to just take a file from the private area and click a button and make it public, and that cannot happen. So you do have to actually carry over every file and move them individually and make them public. So there's a few things, but there are reasons behind why they do it when you get to studying it a little bit. But generally, it has been able to do anything I needed it to do when it comes to collaboration and talking to committees.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So anybody else? And Amber, if you have any, you or Betty both have any, practical tips you want to add as well. I think everybody's intrigued, and especially because this comes as part of Office 365 for those of us that have those professional accounts. And of course,
yeah, so I don't know if we really have much to add. We certainly have not been using it at the anywhere near this depth. We just started trying it out probably at the beginning of the March, really before all these work at home orders were hitting. And so so far we've just been using it for kind of within our office to have kind of weekly meetings and video chats, and we'll call each other and stuff like that. So this has been really eye-opening about the power of what we could do with Teams, and especially some of this committee management, which we actually do a lot of from outside of our networks. So I'm kind of excited to chew on this a little bit and take it back and discuss with Chris how we might be able to use Teams much more broadly. But I don't think that anything that I could offer would help add to what Lori was able to provide. I really appreciate this. I'm sorry, Tip. You were the one that was sharing all this. Thank you.
and Tip, do you have any, before we kind of start talking more generally, any final words of wisdom for folks that are considering this, and particularly if folks aren't using it right now and may want to try and play with it a little bit during these unprecedented times? Any cautions, any inspiration, any encouragement?
Yeah, no, it's like with any software, I usually say just get in and dive in and play with it. We've had probably 4 or 5 of our components who have chosen to move to this platform as well, now having lived in it for a few months from a committee standpoint. So they have come back and asked questions, and I've somehow kind of become the Teams trainer for them. And they're always challenging me, well, how can Teams do this? Well, how can Teams do that? So I'm learning just as they are, if I don't know the answer to those questions. And I would say give it a shot. You just go make a Teams, a quick Teams account and play with it and see if it works. Like I said, there'll be things it can't do, but in these times where I need to have a quick, easy way to talk to my team or to have a quick call with my team. The channels have been incredibly clear. We haven't had any issues with not being able to hear each other and see each other clearly. It's been great. But also being able to just define work and define files for committees to access globally, it's been huge. So I'm so glad we were a year in and not a month in. I think I would be very overwhelmed at this point. But I think with each passing month, I get a new idea of how I can use it, and expand on it. And I'm sure there's a million different things I haven't done yet that I hope to find. Like you're talking about Asana, I really do have to find a great project management tool and work management tool for my staff. And so I'm probably going to go check that out today.
Fantastic. So does anyone else have specific, before we let Tip stop sharing her screen and get back to our gallery of loveliness, if we have any other questions for her? It looks like y'all feel pretty good. So I actually feel like at 10 till that this, I don't know, do y'all want to try and dive into the other 2 topics that I threw out there this morning Should we save them for next week? I feel like this is a really good end point for this segment. And so I want to open it up, and we still have 10 minutes that if we want it. Anyone? Bueller, lowercase beer.
We're all muted.